I think one thing reviewing your work I noticed, and I think even people in the field do, is that they'll confuse well-being with just being happy. So, how do you look at that idea? How do you separate those two concepts?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason for that confusion is that there really are people who just use those words interchangeably and use happiness to mean what other people mean when they say well-being. But for me, I think it's like more or less true now that people use happiness to refer to the feeling. So if just feeling positive is that's what happiness is. I think well-being is something more than that. It includes happiness. Everybody cares about feeling happy. But people differ just in their psychological nature in terms of how much happiness they can have. Like if you look at people's personalities and the way those personalities are essentially encoded in the brain, much of which is genetically inherited. There, everyone's got a kind of happiness set point in a way in terms of how positive they feel about life. Like I'm a pretty anxious person, so I'm never going to be as happy as my friend who's very low in anxiety. But well-being is something I think there are places where you have more control over it than you have over how you feel all the time. And it's also, I think, a more important goal to aim at than just feeling good. So for my money and for lots of philosophers, the thing we're trying to think about and theorize about is something that's bigger than just the feeling of happiness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think as we go on and speak more about it, that distinction will become even clearer. But one idea, one core concept in your work is value fulfillment theory. So could you explain what that concept means for us, please?
Sure. So the basic idea is it's a theory of well-being that says you achieve well-being when you fulfill the values, the things that matter to you, when you achieve those things. And the more those values are psychologically integrated, so they fit your whole self, and the more they fit together, the more well-being you'll have. So you live well by finding out what are those values that fit myself, that match me, who I am, and what are the values that I can pursue together as a set over
Mm,
time. They're not just all fighting with each other,
mhm,
and live a life in accordance with those. That's what I take well-being to be.
I think one of the reasons I reached out to you was because of that kind of understanding. That's how I understood that concept. I think right now, especially for my generation, like we were speaking about, it's such an important thing to understand how to have a value system you can carry on through your life. I mean, what to even value itself has become difficult for us to understand. But I think if you go through a life without a value system, without understanding what your value system is, it can be really difficult. And so one of the things I'm really big on promoting on this channel is giving people the tools in order to get through some of the difficult ways that the world before us has been structured. So yeah, make like approaching that concept of value and like kind of breaking that down. What does it mean to value something?
So I think that valuing something is kind of special, and it's not just wanting it, it's not just thinking it's good. It's a combination. So if let's say you probably value education because you spent a long time in school and you're educating other people with these podcasts. So if you value education, and some people just want an education to get a job, but if you value education, it means for sure you want to be educated. You want to teach people other things, but you also have certain emotions about it. You feel joy when you learn new things. You feel curious. That could be an emotion of, that curiosity about anything new. And you also make certain kinds of judgments about education. Like you think, well, education's important, and so I ought to make some plans to include it in my life. Like I have a reason to, enroll in this master's program, or I have a reason to keep doing this podcast, even though I'm tired. So it's all three of those things, your desires and your emotions and those judgments about what you have a reason to do in your life. They all come together when you value something. And I think often people's values are not quite so ideal. They're not so harmonized. So sometimes you really love doing something, but you got taught that it's not a good thing to do. And so your judgments are you're kind of judging yourself for loving it. You know what I mean? Um, that's a case where you lack integration, but ideally the best sorts of values are the harmonized ones.
Then would it be fair to say that a value is kind of in between something that's intrinsic and something that's kind of developed by your environment? How do people look at how they attain these values?
Yeah, great question. That you cannot escape your family and enculturation. So I think we have the values that we have. If we're talking about adults, we adults have the values we have partly because of what our families raised us to value, partly because of the influence of our culture, and partly because of our own experience and reflection with the world. So all three of those factors go together. I think so. I should have also kind of highlighted in the background. There's also human nature. I mean, there's some things that we're just going to care about because we're human beings. Maybe not every single person on the planet, but most of us. So because we have all that influence early on, I think I think one thing that's kind of underlying your question is like, isn't it hard to change your values when you got them so young from your family and from your own nature? And I think that's absolutely true. But what you can do is change the meaning of that value in your life. I think we can change the priority of some of our values. So you might not be able to change things completely, but for instance, take the value of education again. Maybe I have a number of students whose families really drilled into their head, you are going to go to med school and become a doctor. And when they're in college, they're in their first year of college, they think, yeah, I value education and I value it as a means to getting myself to med school, which is what I have to do for some reason. Well, then they think for a while, they realize that they absolutely hate all their science classes and they love this other stuff they're doing. So they start to think about the value of education and they think, I agree with my parents that education is important, but I think it means something else. I don't think it means getting this set of skills that will let me do this other thing that makes a lot of money. I think it means exploring the things that are intrinsically interesting to me. So the value sort of stays the same, but the means to it and its position in your life and its interpretation, all of that stuff changes.
Yeah.
I mean, just one last thing, you can really see that with relationships. Almost everybody values friendship and family relationships, intimate relationships. When you're young, that means one thing. And then as you age, starts to mean something else. For one thing, lots of people have children, and suddenly you have a whole new kind of relationship to value. So relationships will always be there as part of our human nature to value relationships. But what that means, how it's prioritized, how it fits with your other values, that can change over time.
I know in the field of philosophy there is many different understanding of value, understanding of well-being, right? There's the hedonic perspective, there's the materialistic perspective. Would you say your perspective is different from those two, and how does it kind of mesh with those other two?
Yeah, so the hedonic perspective basically just says that pleasure or the feeling of happiness is all there is to well-being. And I just think that's too narrow. I think there are other things important in life besides pleasure. I think pleasure is great. And, hopefully all the things you do, you find some pleasure in, but I don't think pleasure is always the point. So I'm definitely different from the hedonists on that score. then there are these more kind of, you mentioned the, what did you call them? Eudaimonistic theories.
The materialistic, the possessions and stuff like that that matter.
Oh yeah, so that's not a view that philosophers take seriously. It's kind of a view that they mostly criticize. Because if you think about it, it doesn't having lots of stuff doesn't even make people feel very happy. So it seems like a bit of an empty goal to have for your life. And in the best case, even if, for some people having a lot of stuff does make them happy, but then really the point, the thing you're going for is the feeling of happiness, not the stuff. So the material possessions or money, that's always going to be instrumental to something else. And then the philosopher wants to know what's it instrumental to? And maybe it's just feelings of happiness, but I think it's more than that. I think it's, fulfilling your values, one of which is probably happiness. I think most of us value the feeling of happiness. So it's in there, but it's just not the only thing.
I think also one thing that really interests me about this topic is competing values and competing interest, and how maybe nowadays that's even more prevalent. Could you speak to that? Like, has society we created made values and competing interest more general than it was before? How has the ideas of value changed over time?